So let's move on to the message this morning. We're going to be continuing our series called This Is Us. This series about relationships, about our families, about the roles that we play in life. And whenever I talk on this issue, I realize that for many of us, the relationships that we have, the families that we're in, the roles that we are playing can be a painful subject. There are people who have been rejected. There are people who have been betrayed. There are people who have been abused. There are broken relationships all over the place. And so I realize that when we speak on relationships, that it's not all neat and clean and, there's no tidy bow on top of anybody's life. All of us have some mess. All of us have some pain associated with the relationships. And some of you carry some very, very deep pain relationally. And it's that I want to talk about today. And I think even single moms and stay-at-home moms, I was thinking about our moms this week, those who struggle to feel noticed as they parent their kids through sickness and dirty diapers and snotty attitudes and general unappreciation. I came across this little article called I'm Invisible from a lady named Nicole Johnson. I'm going to read part of it to you. She said, "It all began to make sense. The blank stares, the lack of response, the way one of the kids will walk into the room while I'm on the phone and ask to be taken to the store. And inside I'm thinking, can't you see I'm on the phone? Obviously not. No one can see if I'm on the phone or cooking or sweeping the floor or even standing on my head in the corner because no one can see me at all. I'm invisible. Some days I'm only a pair of hands, nothing more. Can you fix this? Can you tie this? Can you open this? Some days I'm not a pair of hands. I'm not even a human being. I'm a clock to ask, what time is it? I'm a satellite guide to answer, what number is the Disney Channel? I'm a car to order, right around 5:30, please." I was certain that these were the hands that once held books, and the eyes that studied history, and the mind that graduated. But now they had all disappeared into the peanut butter jar, never to be seen again. She's going, she's gone. I think all of our roles, even the good ones that we're playing, have a degree of pain associated with them. And we're going to speak about that today. So let's look at Genesis chapter 16. If there ever was a story about family dysfunction, there are lots of them in the Bible. I think that's one of the reasons that we can trust the Bible, because it never whitewashes over the people of God. It never tells the pretty story. It tells the real story. And I think that's why we can relate to it. And so let's look at Genesis chapter 16. Hear the word of the Lord. I'm just going to throw a few interjections in here just to move the story along. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. And so she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." So let's stop right there. Is this a good scenario or a bad scenario? We know things are going to go down the wrong path, right? Abram agreed to what Sarah said. And so we could stop there again and talk about that. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. And then Sarah said to Abraham, "You're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." And Abram, being a good husband, said, "Your slave is in your hands. Do to her whatever you think is best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah answered. I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they'll be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you'll give birth to a son. You'll name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He'll be like a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him. And he'll live in hostility toward his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. The word of the Lord. So the first thing I want you to notice in this story is the problem and pain of unbelief. The problem and pain of unbelief. This is a story about God's people acting in unbelief. God had promised Abraham and Sarah that they would have a child. God had promised that he would deliver it in a miraculous way. But because their biological clocks are ticking, they decide that they're going to take matters into their own hands. And Sarah tells Abram to sleep with her slave girl, Hagar, so that he can have a son. And it was actually a common cultural pagan practice to do this. It wasn't something out of the ordinary. And so when she suggested it, it probably didn't come as a big surprise to Abram. It does to us in our context, but in their context, it would not have been a big surprise. It would not have been a big surprise to Hagar, the slave girl. But it wasn't what God had told them to do. God had told them that he would provide a son for them, that Sarah would conceive, and that they would have an heir. And they decide, however, to take matters into their own hands and make a mess of things. Whenever we take matters into our own hands, we make a mess of things. Whenever we don't trust God's promises, God's word to us, we mess things up. We tear the fabric of our lives. We tear the fabric of the relationships that we have. This is Hagar's story, though. This is not primarily Abram and Sarah's story. This is Hagar's story. She's an immigrant from Egypt. She has no sense of belonging. She's forced to sleep with her mistress's husband, becomes pregnant with Abram's child. And then to make matters worse, she's not all innocent in the story. As soon as she gets pregnant, she walks around with a little bit of a chip on her shoulder and looks down on her mistress. I can do something that Sarah can't. I can provide Abram with the heir that he's been longing for and looking for. And so the original text said that Sarah decreased in size in front of Hagar. She was diminished in her sight. Whereas once she respected her, now she diminished in size and she disrespected her. Sarah recognizes that her slave girl sees her as inferior, and she blames Abraham. You're responsible for this wrong that I'm suffering. I put my slave girl in the literal text is lap. I put her in your lap, and look at what's happened. And Abraham does what any husband would do. It's not my problem. You're the one that suggested it. I'm washing my hands clean of this. And so Abraham says, do whatever you think is best, or do whatever you want to do with her. And she mistreats her, and Hagar does the right thing. She flees. And the whole situation is one hot mess. If ever there was a poster child for the #MeToo movement, it would be Hagar, right? She would be the one. She's running away from a household where her body has been abused, and it's just been abused to produce an offspring. She's trapped in this system where she's an object, she's discarded, she has no rights, she's got no dignity, she's got no freedom, she's got no choice. She's a nobody with no name. In fact, when you read the story, you'll notice that Abraham and Sarah don't even refer to her as Hagar. They refer to her as the Egyptian or the slave girl. She's got no name in their eyes. She is invisible. She's an object, there to serve a purpose. Hagar flees, and she does what anyone in their right mind would do. She flees from that crazy household. She doesn't want to be treated as a persona non grata. She doesn't want to be abused. You can't blame her. She knows exactly what she doesn't want, but she's not quite aware of her deepest need. Hagar flees. And it's in the wilderness where she encounters God. She meets him, and she names him. She names God. When you name God, it means that you've had a personal encounter with him. You're not just pulling a name out of the air. You're not just Googling some name. Oh, what would be a cool name for God? She has had a deep personal encounter with him. When someone has encountered God in the Bible, they have a name for him because he's met a significant need in their lives. For example, when David needs care and provision and protection, he prays, "The Lord is my shepherd." He names God as shepherd because God has met a need in his life. God has met him in the wilderness. He's met him in the desert, and he's provided for him like a shepherd would provide for his sheep. Those personal names reveal something about God's character, but they also reveal something about our deep personal need. And I think for those of you who've had an encounter with Jesus, who have had an encounter with God, if I were to press you, you could probably come up with a name. And the name might be the God who loves. The name might be the God of grace. The name might be the God who protects. The name might be the God who provides. The name might be the God of second and third chances. You would have a name for God if you've had an encounter with him. And when when Hagar meets God in her place of pain, she names him El Roi, the God who sees. This is the God who sees. I want you to notice that unbelief in Abram and Sarah's life, and also in Hagar's life at that point, caused a great amount of pain. But I also want you to notice that God pursues her. She went into the desert thinking, I'm washing my hands clean, I'm leaving well enough alone. If it were up to Abram and Sarai, they would have just let her go. All done. She's gone, the problem is solved, but God goes into the wilderness and God pursues her in her place of pain. That tells us something about our God. He doesn't just let his people go into the wilderness in pain. He walks after them, and he looks to encounter them. And she names him the God who sees me. The God who sees me. What does it mean to be seen by God? What does this mean for her? What does it mean for us? What does it mean to be seen by God, to have a God who sees us? What difference does it make in my life? What difference does it make to me as a dad, as a mom, as a woman, as a man, as a young person, as a divorced person, as a single person? What difference does it make that God actually sees me? If I'm lonely, or I'm cast aside, or I'm unnoticed, or I'm forgotten, or feel invisible, what does it mean that God sees me? Well, my grandkids, when I hang out with my grandkids, they all want me to notice them. Hey, look, Grandpa, I can ride a bike. Look, Grandpa, I can eat all my food. Look, Grandpa, I can read a book. Look, I can pull my brother's hair. They want you to notice. There's this fundamental need to be seen, and we don't just want anyone to look at us. We want the significant people in our lives to look at us. We want to be seen by someone who actually matters to us. You know, when you're playing sports, you don't want your friend's dad to come to the game. You want your own dad to come to the game. You want to be seen by someone who matters to you. To be seen is fundamental to our being. We need to be seen. What does it mean? It means, first of all, to be known and understood. To be seen is to be known and to be understood by God. From heaven the Lord looks down and he sees all mankind. From his dwelling place he watches all who live on earth. He forms the hearts of all, who considers everything they do. The Bible says that people look at the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. God peers deep into our inner beings. He sees our souls, our minds, our emotions, our will. He understands them. He sees them. He knows them. Someone wrote, I love people. I love my family, my children, but inside myself is a place where I live all alone. There are parts of you that no one else sees. You can be part of a a healthy, happy family and still feel very much alone inwardly. Even the closest people in our lives don't know everything about us. Can't peer into our souls. They only know what we tell them. They only know what we reveal. But God sees it all. And when Wendy and I were first married, I couldn't understand her. I mean, it was tough. She has her own tendencies. I'm more extroverted, she's more introverted, and I could never understand that. Took me a long time to figure that piece out. I'm not that smart. Her love language is serving, and mine is quality time together. And so, on a day off, she would have her honey-do list. If you love me, honey, you'll do something around the house. And so she would have her list of things to do on my day off. How dare she, right? And mine, because it's quality time, I'd say, honey, I just want to go to the park and do something together with you and the kids. Not until this stuff's done. And there would be a little bit of a tiff. And finally we figured those pieces out, and we learned to live in harmony together. When we went to Norway, we'd been married for 30 years. We went to Norway, and I would walk around after we had conversations, and I would say to Wendy, I understand now. I think I understand your family. I thought your family was weird. They're just Norwegian. Right? They're not strange at all. And we've been married for 33 years now. And there are still times that she surprises me. There are still times that I scratch my head and I go, I never knew that about you. People are complex. We've got 4 kids. And we had to learn, still learning, how we relate to each one and how they relate. What works with one doesn't work with the other. We had one, you could always tell when they were trying to lie. You'd look at them and their whole facial expression would just give it away. And then we had another who could look at you straight in the eye and tell you the biggest, baddest lie ever and not bat an eyelash. Right? They're just so different. One was organized, the other a hoarder. Right? We're complex, we're intricate. And we have this deep sense that we need to be known, because to be seen and known is to be understood. And one of the things we hate the most is to be misunderstood. We don't like to be misunderstood. One of the things that I think hurts us the most is when people misunderstand us and misjudge us because they don't know us. They don't know the deep, and what we're saying is they don't really know our deep inner motives, our being. And we discover with God that He knows us. He peers deep into our hearts. He knows our thoughts and our motives and our insecurities and our fears and our anxieties and our desires. There is no misunderstanding with Him. He knows it all. So to be seen is to be known and to be understood. To be seen is to be significant as well. Hagar, the picture of insignificant person in the Bible, in Abraham's eyes anyway, in Sarah's eyes, misunderstood, invisible, cast aside, is actually a very significant person. In all of ancient Near East literature, not just in the Bible, in all literature, Hagar is the only woman, I've discovered, to ever be addressed by name by a deity as she encounters God Himself. Hagar has the longest conversation of any woman and almost any man in the whole Old Testament with God. When we think of people in this world, we think of celebrities, people who are significant, those who are seen by everyone, the people on the red carpet, having their pictures taken, the people whose names get posted on television or on the internet. To be seen by others is thought to be a person of significance. To be seen by God is to be a person of significance. Psalm 139, verse 16, before I formed you, I saw you. My eyes saw your unformed body. God saw you before anyone else did. You're a person of significance because you've been seen by the Creator. He saw you long before anyone else ever did, even before your parents did. and he watches over what he's created. To be seen by God means that your life is significant. Your coming and your going is seen by him. Even if others aren't noticing you, God notices you. God is paying attention to you. You're a person of significance in the eyes of the Creator. To be seen by God is to be secure as well. God tells Hagar, go back to your mistress and submit to her. Quite an ask. But that's her best chance of survival. She's not going to survive as a single pregnant woman out in the wilderness. And God promises her, go back, do what I tell you to do. So she's going back as an act of faith. She's doing what Abraham and Sarah didn't do. They did not live by faith at that point, even though he's the father of faith. But at that point, they were taking matters into their own hands. She's asked to do something. Go back by faith. And God says to her, I'll do this for you. I'll increase your descendants so that they will be too numerous to count. Basically, he's making the same promise that he made to Abraham back in Genesis 12 and 15. I'm going to increase your descendants. In essence, what God is saying to her is, I'm giving you a hope and a future. Your life may be messed up. Other people may have abused you. Other people may see you as an object. But I'm giving you a hope and a future if you're willing to go back and live by faith and trust me. He's giving her security. To be seen by God is to be secure in God. You think of that when your kids wander off and you can no longer see them. I think a sense of panic sets in if you're a watchful parent and if you're a kid who realizes that suddenly I'm out of sight of my parents. They don't know where I am. There's a sense of panic that sets in. But to be seen by God is to be secure in God, that God is always seeing us. Jeremiah chapter 24, verse 6, God says of his people who are in exile, he says, my eyes will watch over them for their good. They're in exile. They're miles away from home. They're thinking, God doesn't see us anymore. We're not secure anymore. They hang their harps up and they weep, but God says, my eyes will watch over them, and I'll watch over them for their good. To be seen is to be secure, and then to be seen is to be free. To be seen is to be free. There are two things. I mean, when you think of God watching you or seeing you all the time, that's on the one hand, it's terrifying. It's like Adam and Eve in the garden, right? The moment they sin, they're exposed. They hide from God. They hide from each other. When God comes calling, they're terrified. And so to think of God seeing us, knowing what's in our hearts, knowing that we're already condemned, so to speak, knowing that we've sinned, knowing that we carry shame around, knowing that we've abused and been abused, and all of the stuff that we're carrying around, to think of God actually seeing us is actually terrifying. Unless his gaze is loving. If his gaze is condemning, it's terrifying. It's actually condemning and we feel imprisoned. But if his gaze is loving, it actually sets us free. Free from condemnation. Free from our fears. Free to be. It has the opposite effect if his gaze is loving. And the verse that Kevin quoted earlier from Zephaniah says, God will take great delight in you. He'll quiet you with his love. Do you know that feeling, to be quieted by the love of God? To know that God sees us? To be able to sit in his presence? To be loved by him? To be seen by him? To know that he's pleased with us? Because you think if his gaze is not loving, if his gaze is condemning, to be seen by him is terrifying, and it would make us want to hide. But if his gaze is loving and non-condemning and non-judging, then it actually sets us free. Free from our fears, free from our shame, free from our guilt, free from the rejection of others, free from disapproval of others, or needing to be approved by others, free from abuse. We're set free by the loving eyes of our Father. See, you are not invisible. You are not unnoticed. You are not rejected. That's what Hagar discovered when she went into the desert. I have a God who sees me. And because he sees me, it means that I'm known and understood. It means that I'm a person of significance. It means that I have a hope and a future. I'm secure. And it means that I'm free if I'm seen by God. So what difference does it make to you that God sees you? How does this actually translate into everyday life? I don't think it does, unless you actually learn to meet his gaze. Unless you actually learn to see the God who sees you. That's what Hagar does, right? She sees the God who sees her. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me, for she said, I have now seen the one. I have now seen the one who sees me. That's mind-blowing because the Jewish belief is that you can't see God, you can't encounter God, have a direct encounter with him and live. It's impossible for a sinful human being to come into the presence of a holy God and actually live. And yet Hagar does. She sees him. Perhaps God is revealing himself to her in a special way. He's making himself known to her. He's made himself known to Abraham and to Sarah, but now he's going outside of his people and he's revealing himself to this foreign woman, showing himself to be a God of grace and mercy. He's showing himself to her in a way that reveals his character. The Jews had always believed that no one could see God and live, and yet Hagar does, and so can we. So can we because of Jesus. John chapter 1 tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. He was with God when God created the world, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And John writes, we have seen his glory. We have seen his glory. And Jesus stands up one day and he says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. When we see Jesus, we can encounter God. When we see Jesus, we can see the one who sees us. We can encounter this God who sees us. You can hear about God in church. You can read about God, but you need to encounter God. You need to see God in the face of Jesus. The story of Job, you remember the story of Job? He loses all of his possessions. He goes through unimaginable pain. He loses his children. At the end of it all, Job says in chapter 42, verse 5, my ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. My ears have heard of you. I've been to church. I've been to Sunday school. I've recited the verses. But now my eyes have seen you. I have encountered God. I have seen you. I think the greatest tactic of the enemy is that he keeps us from seeing God. 2 Corinthians chapter 4:4. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who's the image of God. He blinds us to God by keeping our gaze on other things, on money, on sex, on material things, on advancing our careers, on too much TV, on food, and on drink, and all of those false gods that blind us to the true God. Running after things that we think, looking at things that we think, gazing at things that we think will actually satisfy the deepest part of our lives, that will give us significance. If I do this, it'll give me security. If I do this, then I'll really be known by this person. If I compromise on this thing. If I do this, then I'll really be free. He blinds us. God has given us Jesus so that we can see the God who sees us. If you want to see God, look to Jesus. Get to know Jesus. If you want to see God, look at Jesus. Look at his living. Look at his dying. Look at his rising. Look at his ascending. This is who God is. He's the God who hangs out with prodigals, as we talked about last week. He's the God who welcomes sinners. This is what God's like. If you want to see God, look at Jesus. Take time in the Gospels to read the Gospels and fall in love with Jesus all over again. We can study the Bible and look for facts, or we can study the Gospels and look for God in the face of Jesus. This is what God is like. Look at the cross. You'll see a God who opens his arms up for us, stretches them out for us, and dies for us. If you want to see the God who sees you, look at the cross. This is the God who sees you. Contemplate the cross for a while and let the cross wash over your heart and your mind so that you can see the God who sees you. Look at the cross and look at the resurrection, the empty tomb, and see the God who sees you. This God of power who overcomes death for us, who overcomes hell for us. Look at the God of life, this God of life that gives us life because of the resurrection. Life that can never, ever be defeated by sin and death and Satan and hell ever again. This is the God who sees you. And then the God who ascends, the one who ascends into heaven, is seated at the right hand of God the Father, now interceding for us, constantly praying for us, praying that we will continue to be faithful to him, the one who lives to ever intercede for us. This is the God who sees you. Look at Jesus, and you'll see the God who sees you. Fall in love with Jesus, and you'll see the God who sees you. And you'll learn that you're known and you're understood when you look at Jesus. You'll learn that you're a person of great significance when you see Jesus. You'll learn that you have a hope and a future when you see Jesus. You need to see Jesus. So as we close today, I'm going to invite our team to come back up. They're going to lead us in song. I'm going to invite you to stand together with me. If you've never, ever begun to contemplate, to look at Jesus, I want to invite you to do that. Let's just bow our heads together. I'm going to pray. If you've never, ever leaned into him, today might be that first step in. And just to say yes to him, I want to do that. And then for some, it may just be a recommitment that this week I'm going to spend some time contemplating, meditating the person of Christ. I'm going to look in his face again. I'm going to read the Gospels again. I'm going to purpose my heart to see Jesus. So we invite you, Jesus, to reveal the God who sees us. Help us to see the one who sees us. We pray in your name. Amen.